Another crime story, really. Lake Mead, it's just outside of Las Vegas. It's over there in Nevada. Massive Great Lake in the desert. Well-known playground where people go boating and enjoy the sunshine. Now, they're having a terrible drought over there, aren't we all? And the water levels of Lake Mead have gone down dramatically. So there's a sort of dried up, parched lake bed area. And as the water's gone down, it's been giving up its macabre secrets. Turns out this was a place where the mafia, as they were setting up Las Vegas, don't forget it was the mob who established Las Vegas back in the 1940s. This is where they dumped all the bodies of the people that they whacked, as they call it. And so they've been finding these bodies, one of which was in a barrel that was weighted down with chains. Another one, bodies found all over this. So it sort of gives up, it's giving up its secrets, and it's kind of reminding us of what used to go on in Las Vegas. So let's talk to someone who knows all about this. He's a criminal justice policy analyst, Joshua Crawford. Good afternoon, Joshua.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, this is a fantastic story, an intriguing story. 3 bodies found so far, and they're expecting to find more. This is where the mob used to dump their victims who they whacked, right?
So they've actually just found a 4th set of remains yesterday.
Blimey.
So far, of the 4 sets of remains, the one that you referenced earlier that was found in a barrel that has a clear gunshot wound, that one is being investigated as a homicide, but authorities have not determined sort of cause of death for the other ones at this point. They're indicating that mob ties are speculative at this point, but the one in particular that involved the barrel and the gunshot looked particularly suspect. So I think we'll probably see more of this as the waters recede, but that one in particular is quite suspect.
A bullet through his head and in a barrel, yes, it does look suspicious, doesn't it? I wouldn't have thought that the police have much chance of solving that homicide, would you?
No, the authorities have indicated that that body and that corpse is actually reasonably well preserved, and so they've been able to identify the clothing and the sneakers that individual was wearing, and they placed the timing on that somewhere between the late 70s and 1980s. So there's not the witnesses for those kinds of things. DNA extraction for the more decomposed bodies is going to be very difficult. And so positively identifying most of these victims is going to be remarkably difficult without somebody forward. Oftentimes when these sort of organized crime mass graves are found, especially in the case of former South Boston gangster Whitey Bulger, there were 5 bodies exhumed 25 years later, but that was because a couple of people had turned government cooperator and identified where those bodies were. So when they're just sort of found like this, it's remarkably difficult to identify who those victims are.
And I gather these bodies are being found quite often by Americans who go there to look at this kind of newly parched, dehydrated lake. And the reason that many of them are going there is Bugsy Siegel, the gangster who kind of created Las Vegas back in the 1940s. He was said to, apocryphally, said to have stashed much of his cash and treasures in barrels, weighted down barrels, and put them to the bottom of the lake. And these speculative people who are visiting are hoping to find some of this money. That's another intriguing story from the past.
Oh, it's the perfect story, right? Las Vegas is already the place where people go to fulfill their hopes and dreams, right? My friends and I joke that literally anything you want to do, you can do in Las Vegas. You want to shoot an automatic rifle, there's a place you can shoot an automatic rifle. You want to gamble away your rent and hope to make it rich, you can do that in Las Vegas. And so you add this added layer of previous mob involvement, you add this layer of possibility, make it rich at the bottom of a lake. I mean, it's got all the intrigue of a Hollywood movie.
And so, of course, if he did put his money at the bottom of the lake, he never got the chance to retrieve it because he was murdered himself in 1947. Just remind us, Joshua, if you will, of the story of Bugsy Siegel, the man who made Vegas.
Yeah, so Las Vegas has been in America over the years with varying degrees of reality in those films. But organized crime plays a critical role in establishing Las Vegas to what it was. Nevada already had legalized gambling, and so it was sort of a refuge for the Northeast organized crime syndicates, that they could be sort of away from home. The Robert De Niro movie Casino does sort of one of the better jobs of highlighting some of this kind of stuff. But like with so many places where the rule of law is absent and street justice prevails, your risk of losing your life was nearly as high as your risk of making it rich. And so many of the guys that profited early on found untimely death.
Now some of them seem to be being found as the lake gives up its macabre secrets. I mean, I first went to Vegas probably back in the very early 80s, and it was a very different place even then. You know, many of the casinos were, you know, smoke-ridden places where people playing poker all night. But now it's sort of transformed into a sort of family playground. But its origins, you know, it was real kind of hard-nosed gambling. By people, you know, who are drinking, smoking, and going round the clock. So it's changed in its character, hasn't it, over the years?
Oh, absolutely. It's sort of adult Disneyland at this point, right? It's lights, it's still the casinos, but it is very different from the way it was years ago. You're also much more likely to see somebody on the casino floor in cargo shorts than you are a full suit. There was a time in Vegas's history where everybody would be sort of dressed to the nines. It was this thing that you sort of went out to do. But as these bodies are being recovered, I mean, Las Vegas last year alone had 185 murders within the city limits.
Oh, so it's still got that edge to it.
Yeah, and that makes it a somewhat typical American city, frankly. You know, the majority of homicides that happen in this country are sort of standard community violence. They're disputes over things that boil over and result in a homicide, and that has exacerbated here in recent years. We're experiencing a significant increase over the last several years, last 6 years or so, in homicide in this country. But yeah, Las Vegas had 185 murders last year. And so a couple of remains will be sort of statistically insignificant for the city.
When you're talking about some of the nefarious things that still go on in Vegas, and of course did in the past, there's that phrase, isn't there? What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We've only got a minute or so left, Joshua. Fascinating to talk to you. The mob still prospering in America, and they've always had this very strict code. If you break their code, they kill you.
Yeah, the organized crime, the way people think of it, is different in the United States than it was in the 1980s or 70s, and certainly before that. Street gangs, sort of criminal street gangs, what people think of, are responsible for a lot of the street-level narcotics distribution, are also responsible for large levels of violence. And one of the major players that has emerged in recent years is the Mexican drug cartels that are actually operating within the bounds of the United States now. And so they have in some ways filled that organized crime void.
But what about the mob? I mean, it is still very much in existence. It's still in New York, still in Vegas, I'm assuming.
It's not what it once was, in part because technologies have changed to the point that it's just more easy to survey and apprehend individuals. But organized crime certainly still operates within the United States, yeah.
So I can still cherish the idea that there are some real-life Tony Sopranos around. Sure,
you certainly can gravitate to that, but it is sort of an ever-changing dynamic, and it's not what it once was, and it's not even what it is sort of in Eastern Europe, let's say.
Fantastic to talk to you. Really interesting. Thank you very much, Joshua. That's Joshua Crawford, criminal justice policy analyst from over there in America. These mafia bodies being found as the water recedes. It's an extraordinary story, and just maybe if you're really lucky, you might find one of those Bugsy Siegel barrels full of money and treasures that he's rumoured to have put and sunk to the bottom of the lake. Great story, really great story.